I recently started getting a lot of questions that pertain to the concept of whether or not the Necromancer minion build was going to get nerfed walking into Season 4. And it turns out that it was all percolating up from a video from my good friend Wudijo here that posted 3 days ago. So before we go any further, I'm going to have the link to his video obviously down in the description below. You can go ahead and check that out. And then also, because we're watching a YouTube video at all, first off, let's just go ahead and click that little thumbs up. Let's go ahead and comment first, because obviously I was here first, definitely here first 3 days ago. But I basically just want to give Woody his chance to just kind of explain what he's explaining here, because one, I think he's got a good point. Two, I'm kind of sad to say, but I agree with him. But I promise it's not all dark and gloom here. I went and crunched all the numbers. Nobody needs to, run out of the burning house just yet. But let's go ahead and hear what Woody's got to say.
So in general, some of the numbers are off, some of the stats are off, and well, plus 25 to Golem Mastery is certainly off, I think.
And plus 25 to Mage Mastery.
I believe that this is going to be on the Amulet, and you're going to have one opportunity to roll these Mastery ranks. And then, that's it basically, because on the Amulet is usually where you have your passives. So yeah, if you look for passive, there is this here. They're not called passive anymore. They're just
Gloom's the best one, obviously.
This and that. But yeah, you have all these passives here that usually go into an Amulet. So that is probably still going to work that way, just like before. However, on the PTR, again, kind of interesting, you were able to roll multiple passives on your Amulet, which was
Sorry to interrupt him really quickly. That was very, very interesting and something that we kind of walked away with expecting to stay in the game. They were no longer affix locking passives on the amulet. So you could get 3 to Avulsion and 3 to Compounding Fracture and 3 to Fueled by Death or Amplify Damage, or if you were some kind of Maniac Death's Approach at this point. But yeah, that was very interesting as well. And I'm not necessarily going to touch on that concept because we have no reason to believe that isn't going to be how it works in game, but he makes a really good point about Golem, and I'm gonna very slightly re-explain what he was talking about just so I can do it in the planner myself, and I can show you ultimately how I'm going to crunch these numbers to make sure that our Golem builds and our minion builds aren't all of a sudden just gonna get nerfed into the ground here. So if you saw recently, I basically completed all of my theory crafting for every single build that currently exists for the Necromancer, including some builds that don't currently exist for the Necromancer on Maxroll. I have a link to all of these build planners currently in my Discord. The link to the Discord is down in the description below. All you got to do is just go join in there. Then you can have access to all of these as I maintain them. Real quick clarification for the pure minion one. You'll notice that if you read these last ones here, they actually link to the same build. It's because it's just 2 different variants on the same build. So you have the endgame version, which is a Golem focused version, and then a Shadow endgame version, which was focused on Shadow mages. But that's neither here nor there. Go ahead and check the description down in the link below. If you find any of the build guides particularly helpful, or if you enjoy them, consider leaving a like on the comment and tell me down in the comments below which one you personally like the most. It's really nice to get some feedback on what people were enjoying, what they appreciated, and the builds that people are kind of most excited to play walking into the season. But let's go ahead and get back to this analysis, right? The basic concept is that Woody surmised that the fact that we could roll +4 to Golem Mastery on our helmet, our chest, our gloves, our pants, and our boots was kind of weird. And to his credit, you also couldn't roll this passive skill on the amulet. Now, why is that so weird? Maybe you're new to the Necromancer, maybe you really haven't sat down and thought about these things yet, but it turns out that every piece of gear that can have plus skill ranks on it tend to have very specific families of skill ranks. So for the helmet, you normally just have plus ranks to curse skills. This would either just be the overarching idea of a curse skill. It would also be Decrepify as well as Iron Maiden. So it was weird that on a gear piece that traditionally only had curse skill ranks on it, all of a sudden you can now get 1 of each minion mastery. For the chest piece, you could normally get the Macabre skills here, and there's also one other slight outlier, but the Macabre skills on your armor include Blood Mist as well as Bone Prison. Lastly, they also put Corpse Explosion charges here. Corpse Explosion charges used to be down on your pants, so it's a little bit interesting that they moved it up here, but they've also just changed the theming of pants, and we'll get to that in a quick second. But again, it was interesting that all of a sudden you could also pick up the minion passives here when it's just supposed to be the creepy skills in our skill tree. The gloves famously have your core skills here, so you could get your Blood Lance, you can get your Blood Surge, you could get your Bone Spear, but again, all of a sudden you can get all of your pet masteries, which was just kind of interesting considering the gloves have only ever had core skills on them, that nothing about that was really changing. Pants are where you actually get your basic skill ranks now, which is kind of cool. They finally give us a piece of gear that could just proactively get basic skill ranks. So you could get Reap here, you could go ahead and get Bone Splinters, etc. This is how you empower a basic skill build. And then for the boots historically have only ever had Bone Spirit and Corpse Tendrils as far as skills. Now they also added +4 ranks to all corpse skills, so that would be Corpse Explosion and Corpse Tendrils, but that's what you should expect to get on your boots. And as Woody pointed out, your amulet is where you get every other passive skill in the game. So as opposed to an active skill, like all the other gear pieces that I just mentioned, these would be your passive skills: Avulsion, Compound Fracture, as well as Fueled by Death, Amplified Damage, Tides of Blood, Coalesce Blood, etc., etc. So the fact that those passive skills, all the ones that kind of exist in these types of nodes on your skill tree, the minion masteries have always been weird in that they're located in 3 different nodes across our skill tree. It's always felt kind of weird and disjointed to me, to be honest. I don't understand why they don't just kind of like pop off here. I kind of do. They have to be available earlier so you can pick them up as you're leveling. It's not a completely incorrect choice. But all of this is to say it's weird that you can get that many plus ranks across the rest of your gear. So in this regard, I agree with Voody. I just don't think that we'll realistically walk into the season and see this many ranks. Now, what is the problem with that? Voody was talking about triple critting on a greater affix and getting +5 across 5 different pieces of gear, meaning that you would end up with a total rank of 28 for any of the various mini masteries that you wanted to. And now, while the skeleton warriors are Keck W, nobody would ever invest in them. For skeleton mages in your golem, this actually represents a massive amount of overall damage multiplication. For the golem, you get 25% per skill rank. If you could have 28 skill ranks, that means that you have a whopping total of 700 multiplicative damage. So that would increase your damage by an 8 times multiplier, because it would be 100% of your damage plus 700% of your damage. That's a total of 800% of your damage. And that's obviously a pretty huge amount. Now, all of the analysis that I've done is based off of this build here, where yes, I assume that you had a greater affix version of it. That's what that little star indicates. But I only assume that you successfully masterworked it one time, because it turns out a piece of gear isn't trash if you only triple crit on mastery here. And while it would be the biggest total increase of your damage, the more and more ranks that you got at the higher amount, the difference between 675% golem damage versus 700% golem damage, it would not be super huge, but it would be the way to get the biggest total multiplier out of your gear that you could, at least for a single multiplier, as opposed to your additive damage bucket or considering all of your aspects, etc. Now here's the problem though. How much damage would I expect this build to do? Not damage per second, not DPS, not calculating every single hit of each one of my warriors and all of my mages and every other melee attack of the golem, as well as the relative damage from using corpse tendrils and then also using Army of the Dead, etc., etc. No. I just wanted to understand the one-shot potential of our golem build. Because if you didn't see in the PTR, golems were hitting for a solid 6 billion damage, and that was in part due to how many ranks you could get on the gear, obviously, but also it was due to a bugged interaction with Cult Leader. Cult Leader in the Paragon board, if you've never seen it, it's a probably my least favorite legendary node in the game, and I think it's kind of trash the way that it's implemented, but I've told the developers that multiple times. At the very least, it looks like it's sticking around. But what it says is that your minions are going to gain a damage multiplier for every 20% attack speed that they have. And this has breakpoints. So you need to hit 20% attack speed to gain a 30% damage multiplier. And then every percent of attack speed that you add on to the build after that point doesn't matter until you hit 40% attack speed, at which point you would have a 60% damage multiplier. Now, the reason why this was bugged in the PTR is because while it's supposed to cap at 100% bonus attack speed, it actually just didn't. So you could get your minions up to 200 plus attack speed and get a whopping 600% damage multiplier out of here. For the purposes of our calculation, we're assuming that the cap exists, and this will only ever represent 150% damage multiplier, meaning a 2.5 total multi. If you were to take all of the stats that are currently on my character, including my weapon coefficient, the base coefficient of activating your golem, so that would be the activation right there where he runs up and does a big old slam attack. I am currently using the Iron Golem, and while it shows 650% 160% damage. That's because the tooltip reflects multipliers that you have of golem damage. The base coefficient for this is 200% weapon damage. On top of that, you could also just look at, whether or not you're considering just their every other melee attack, which has a coefficient of 123%. The difference in damage there isn't super big, but for our purposes, we're using the activation. I want to go one shot in Uber Duriel. I want to go kill a level 200 Lilith, right? I'm trying to get every single Uber unique in the game. So that's why we're assuming that we're using the active with a 200% weapon damage modifier as its coefficient. We went and put together all of our additive damage. You can get a lot of golem additive damage. You can also get a lot of just like crit damage. We have 100% chance to crit. So our crit damage just rolls straight into our additive bucket here. There's also things like the golem glyph, etc. So I went and picked out every single additive damage source from our gear as well as from our Paragon, and I put them all into here, and that got us a 16.69 nice total multiplier. For our intelligence, we actually have a pretty decent amount of intelligence on this build. We're sitting at a whopping 179.8 bonus damage. And remember that intelligence is actually its own multiplier. So while this is actually just showing a slightly incorrect number because it was rounding up, we have a 2.798 multiplier from our intelligence. Then we have our aspect multipliers. What this is just a product of all of the individual multipliers that we have on our build. So we have Unyielding Commander for 200. We have Reanimation here. We also have Bone Prison, which is actually triggering Blight for another 1.2 multi. So that's where you get all of these numbers here. Those multiplied together get you a 6.1 total multi. And just before you're maybe confused by the fact that I'm kind of rolling up all the multipliers into one number, remember when you're multiplying numbers together, as long as they all get multiplied to the same number, it doesn't matter when you do it. Like it doesn't matter if I multiply this number by this number by this number, and then multiply by that number, and then multiply by this number, and then multiply it, right? It really doesn't matter. So the numbers at the top are basically representative of that type of multiplier that I have. These are the ones from my intelligence. This is my total additive multiplier. This is all my multipliers from aspects. The fact that when you trigger Raise Skeleton, the actual skill on your bar, your minions do another 30% damage. Then we have our total skill multiplier. This is representative of every single thing in our skill tree that says increase the damage of our golem, most notably Golem Mastery, but things like Hellbent Commander here, as well as, even Death's Embrace, or maybe Amplified Damage, even the Fueled by Death here, right? So all of that's included here. That gets us a total of a 17.91 multi. Status multi is just representative of the fact that we have 100% chance to crit. So that gets us a 50% damage multiplier. And then we will always have vulnerable up on our targets. So that's another 20% damage multiplier there. For our glyph multipliers, this is just every one of our glyphs that gives us a multi. You'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 total glyphs in our Paragon board here. I can just go ahead and show you that very quickly. So this would be control, assuming that we have staggered the monster, or they are just an elite monster that can have control applied to them. Cult leader as well, giving us a 1.15 multi. Essence, I actually only included essence as a 1.11 or an 11% damage multiplier. It only works if the monster isn't healthy, so this assumes that I had to hit the monster twice with my golem. As such, I only really think that this contributes about 50% of its total multiplier. I could have just put this in here as a 1.22 just to make it prettier, but I think that this is more representative of the reality around us. And then lastly, our legendary nodes and the total multipliers available from here. So again, this is the Cult Leader node. This is Flesh Eater node. This is, again, 50% of the time for Scent Eater, because we're going to generate a bunch of corpses. But if there are no corpses on the one shot, you get a 15% damage multi. So again, I just kind of cut that one in half. But that's representative of all of these. This is also the Golem legendary node that just gives them 100% damage multi. And the number that you get when you multiply our base weapon damage across all of this on 925 gear with a level 100 character with at least one greater affix roll on masteries, as well as at least one masterwork crit, and then just valuable masterwork crits across the other things, right? So here I have maximum life and cooldown reduction, but here I have intelligence, which will increase our damage. Here, I guess I don't have anything. We'll just crit chance and golem. It doesn't really matter. Like the point of this doesn't really matter, but let me just add that back in because it's a little bit silly that I didn't have it. But all of that said and told, you get a big old number right there at the end. And because reading a number like this is just kind of hard, I put it down here. This is 1,700,310,281.24 expected damage on average when I click my activation button on my golem when I have all of my multipliers applied simultaneously. This means that Army of the Dead is going, I've consumed 5 corpses, I've applied a curse to them, the golem's been wake for 10 seconds, so reanimation is fully engaged, etc., etc. This is the top end of expected damage from this build, ignoring any other things that could potentially be on it, slight optimizations, etc. So we see here that having a 6.75 total multiplier from the Golem alone, nothing else, is obviously a lot, right? Like if I were to say I didn't have any Golem mastery at all, what does this number end up looking like? So we'll just change this multiplier to 1, meaning that it's not changing the number at all. And all of a sudden we get a much smaller number. Now that being said, this number is still 251 million damage, but you get the idea. It turns out Golem do big damage. And this is why we've been recommending going full minions to any single person who asks the best way to level, to progress, to feel powerful. And this was going to be the broken build, right? This was going to be the Hoda Bar build. Now, the funny part is Bone Spirit was already doing like 3 to 5 billion damage last season. And while we're not going to have as many multipliers available because we're not going to have the Seneschal pet, in fact, we're not really going to have any multipliers available from this season mechanics at all, you would still expect to hit around 1 to 2 billion damage. So even if you're like, Mac, we haven't even gotten to the nerf part yet, I'm afraid I need something better, just go play Bone Spirit. But what happens if you recreate the build, assuming that you can't get Golem ranks on the majority of your gear, and in fact that you could only get it on your amulet? What does that build look like? I went and made a what if no Golem ranks version of this build. And again, this build link is in my Discord, so you can already go check this out if you're somehow watching this video from the future, like hi future me, that's pretty cool. But I went and basically redid the entirety of all of my gear, taking away Golem mastery and redistributing to more important stats that might be more valuable for you. For the amulet, you notice that we're basically missing an affix, and that's because I think that you'll have to put Golem mastery onto your amulet. So the calculation I'm about to show you assumes that you have a greater affix with a single masterwork crit on it, meaning we're going to get +4 ranks from Golem mastery here, meaning another 100% damage bonus, but you're basically not changing anything else on here. You're just losing cooldown reduction, which obviously stinks, but I think the rest of the build has enough to basically manage that without having to worry for it. And then nowhere else do we really have to like change anything. The skill tree doesn't change because we're already maxing out the ranks here. The Paragon board doesn't change. It's just that basically every other multiplier that we have is effectively gained in value because we've removed an incredibly powerful multiplier. So if you pop over to the Without Golem ranks sheet, and I'll also share this sheet in the pinned comment down below as well, in case you just wanted to take a look at it yourself. But basically everything is kind of the same. The only things that really change are we actually got to crit on one of our Golem additive damages. We're able to add on more crit additive damage. And then on top of that, the thing that was Golem Mastery's multi, remember that 6.75, that drops down to 2.75 because 7 total ranks in Golem Mastery, if you don't triple crit on your amulet, which I don't think you can kind of afford to do, but that's like a whole other discussion, would net you 7 times 0.25, which is 175. We add 1 to that, so we get a 2.75 multi. And the final damage number, which you've already been able to look at this entire time, but let's do a drum roll, is a whopping 837,629,144 damage. Now, I just said 837 million damage. That's a lot of damage. That's a super huge amount of damage. That's basically one shot just about anything in the game that you want to, amounts of damage right there. Now, what is the actual difference in damage, right? Well, I went in and included that just above me here. You take your new nerfed number, you take the original number, which is 1.7 billion. You take that, you do 1 minus the difference between the two. And what you get is we are now doing 51% of the damage that we were doing before. So basically cut the minion's top end damage directly in half. And that's pretty impressively kind of nothing. It is ultimately the funny part of this conversation. Now, when we're talking about end game, full end game gear, ridiculous amounts of rolls on your gear, tempers, greater affixes, level 100, basically every single thing that you want, perfect aspects, 100% uptime on all of your multis, assuming that you have overlapping durations on all your multis, 50% damage reduction is a metric ton, right? That's a huge amount of damage to lose. The difference in a perfect world scenario, test tube scenario here, where everything works together, is a difference of doing 1 billion damage or doing just under 1 billion damage. But that's not really what upsets me, because I am very, very upset. I am irate at the potential that they would make this change and not communicate it to us. But before I rant about that, let's talk about the real world scenario that you're absolutely going to find yourself in, which is not having basically perfect gear. Now, leveling on this build is going to be kind of fine, right? Leveling to 1 to 50, getting into the Paragon, is going to be the exact same that it was before. You never really could expect to have like perfect stats on your gear. You might get lucky and hit some stuff during Helltide. You might prioritize getting Golem Mastery and stuff like that on your gear, again, while you're leveling up. But the majority of your power is coming from your skill points as well as your aspects and just the raw skills themselves. Their coefficients are pretty good. You're very easily able to get really large multipliers, right? So Unyielding Commander on any two-handed scythe, even if you only get the Codex of Power version, is still a 2.4 times damage multiplier just by itself when you have Army of the Dead up. In the very early game, while you're first progressing, all your damage is coming from your aspects, all your damage is coming from the skills. And on top of that, a lot of your damage is going to come from the beginner glyphs that you're putting into your boards here. The real big problem comes from when you can expect to have Golem Mastery ranks on your gear, and how crazy of a damage multiplier having up to 1, 2, or even 3 ranks without a greater affix or without a masterwork crit on really adds up on a build when you've basically capped out your aspects. You haven't gotten to rank 15 on all of your glyphs, but you're starting to get into harder content like Nightmare Dungeons and early game pits, or maybe you're trying to fight things like Duriel. The removal of these skill ranks from so many pieces of gear makes it incredibly rare, right? You go from being able to hit it on 5 of the pieces of gear that you're going to be wearing, meaning that you can kind of ignore other stats because you know you might be able to hit it on another piece, to only getting it onto your amulet. That's an incredibly competitive piece of gear. Some of the best stats are on amulets. Not only are other passive skills on the amulet, like the Hellbent Commander ranks here, but critical strike chance to be able to hit 100% chance to crit, which is oddly enough very hard on anything that isn't a bone necromancer until you have late game gear. Enough cooldown reductions so that Army of the Dead is actually relevant for your build here. Even just movement speed to be able to get up to the movement cap so you don't feel like crap running around, especially in early game progression where the necromancer just kind of gets laughed at by the other classes. But isolating these skill ranks to just the amulet means that it locks a lot of power to this one piece of gear that we've always been kind of locked to on the necromancer. It means that getting past that level 50 point, continuing to push and finding ways of empowering your build will get harder and harder and harder if these skill ranks aren't available on these pieces of gear. But here's why I'm actually angry. Again, none of this is set in stone, right? We don't know. I think Woody has a really good point. I think that it is smart to assume that a lot of the things that we saw in the PTR weren't necessarily considered bugs, or maybe not important enough for it to get mentioned, or maybe the developers, since they work with all the information, we only work with the information that they give us, are expecting things to be assumed or expecting that things would always work that way. But if you go look at the patch notes, very specifically, updates from the public test realm. We appreciate all your feedback you provided us. Here's the following section highlights key bug fixes and feedback adjustments. Let's go ahead and look up Golem. Right? Golem. There are a couple instances of Golem. Nothing changed here. Golem, this ability can now be activated while crowd controlled. Yep, we already knew that. Blood Golem. Blood Golem wasn't changed at all from the PTR. Bone Golem wasn't changed at all for the PTR. Iron Golem wasn't changed at all from the PTR. Okay, let's go ahead and go further. Fixed an issue where a Golem attack initiated right after dismounting wouldn't complete. Okay, none of that. Golem, basic attack. Nope, nothing changed about the base attack here. Class updates. Necromancer Golem's doing stuff. Book of the Dead, doing new stuff, new AI. Great. Their attacks are going to hit stuff. Super cool. Great, 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 great. Yeah. So oddly enough, nothing. In fact, I think I'm in a different patch at this point. No, we're at least still in the same patch. Okay, good. But yeah, oddly enough, nothing, right? Nothing in the patch notes. Nothing in the set of notes that are very specifically supposed to be updates from the public test realm. Very specifically supposed to highlight the things that were wrong in the PTR or were being changed in the PTR, or overperforming builds that were being brought into line from the PTR, right? We know that they're going to be nerfing how big tornadoes are on Barbarian, how many you get, etc., etc. Totally agree with the change, not salty about it, but they told us so that we can expect it. Changing how the new unique item for the sorceress works, not being able to just summon like a million frozen orbs. Again, probably needed to happen, was probably kind of silly, but they informed us. They let us know. Now we know that. Now we can change what we're doing. I can change the build guides that I'm making. I can advise you all on how to have a fun time during the season, because the information is supposed to be here in these patch notes. And that's what makes me angry. We had an opportunity to be told this thing. Now, if, again, nothing comes to pass, if it just turns out Woody is just kind of jealous of how awesome necromancers are going to be, that's perfectly fine by me. Hey, man, we have had broken builds in the past, right? Like, people seem to forget that every once in a while. But it'd be pretty cool if I could just be walking around swinging my big old 1.7 billion golem attacks around here. But I don't think that he's wrong. But I think that this type of fumble, this kind of unintentional, lack of inclusion of information, something that, again, maybe they just assumed is how things would work and assumed that we knew, and everybody just kind of assumed that those things were going to happen. I didn't. I sure didn't. I've spent a lot of time theory crafting these builds. I've spent a lot of time working with Chronix to theory craft these builds. I put in a lot of hours trying to come up with like the perfect version of these builds so we can update max roll. And if all that time and effort was for nothing, I'll be pretty pissed. And it kind of sucks because I've been selling players on the concept that minions were undisputed going to be the best build. Now, I do think that these numbers make me very hopeful. In fact, I straight up said that minions were overperforming. No question. Now, I quickly followed it up by saying that I think that they should just let minions be broken for a full season, right? Just let us have it. What's it going to do? We still don't have a teleport skill. We still can't move faster than base movement speed. So like, sure, I can do 1.7 billion damage, but it takes my golem 15 seconds to run up to Duriel. So at the end of the day, the DPS just kind of doesn't matter. But people are so excited to play the minion builds, and the difficulty in reaching these numbers without the addition of a bunch of ranks to a bunch of pieces of gear mean that gearing will be harder. People will find it more difficult to kind of hit that power spike. And while I generally believe this, and I can't stress this enough, this isn't me trying to sugarcoat it for you. It's not me trying to make it sound like losing 49% or 51% of our damage is just like okay, right? I'm very much not okay with this. At the end of the day, 837 million damage is going to do the job. You're going to be fine. The build is going to be fine. It's still going to be hyper mega competitive and absolutely an S tier build just because of how easy it is. You click one button, you do nearly 1 billion damage, right? And this is ignoring using like any elixirs or, again, perfect optimized gear. You could squeak out another couple decimal points here. That's kind of where I'll leave this off. Again, the damage is fine. I'm not about to sit here and cry over 837 million damage. What I am going to cry about is it's going to kill the hype a little bit, right? It's going to kill the buzz a little bit. Everybody was super stoked for my 1.7 billion damage golem hits here. Now, luckily, they also didn't talk about the bugs that were causing you to get multiple billions of damage. So there's a very good chance we'll still have a super bug build and we'll just be able to do billions of damage. It'll probably get fixed in the mid-season patch, but that doesn't change the fact that we as the players just deserve to know when things change because we put this time and effort into doing the PTR, right? We went and tested the game for them. And while I think that we benefit from it, and while I literally financially benefit from being able to make more content about this, you put in work, you put in time and effort. And the least that they can do is tell us if we should expect something different. But there we go. Sound off down in the comments what you think. Is Woody right? Is the doom and gloom here warranted? Does this change your expectations for what the build's going to do, what the class is going to do? I hate the concept of putting out any video that's just like, hey, I think a bad thing's coming. Not because I want to obscure or obfuscate bad things, right? I want to be as honest as possible. I just don't want to kill anybody's hype. But what I also want to do is potentially set some realistic expectations so that you know what you're walking into. I'm beating a dead drum here, right? But at the end of the day, that's ultimately what I hope that this does. It just helps to set realistic, expectations, doesn't kill your hype. The build's going to be insane. The video I just posted at level 27, clearing the first capstone with no aspects, keep in mind, I didn't have any ranks to Golem Mastery. That's just what the skills do on your bar. We're going to be good. We were going to be better. But sound off down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you're brand new here and you haven't seen my content before, consider subscribing to the channel. Or if you see my stuff all the time, check to see if you're subscribed. I might just be showing up in your algorithm because YouTube likes me and wants to show you the stuff that I make. But you really don't want to miss out on anything walking into this season, because I'm going to be churning out guide after guide after guide and information just based off all my experience walking into the season. So once that weekend hits, you can finally start playing. You can put the 18 wives, the 16 kids, and your 14 dogs to sleep, and you get your 20 minutes of gameplay. You'll be fully up to date. So go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss out on that. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.